Guys, this is Pink Across here with another guide video. Today we're going over how to build hyper offense teams. If you're enjoying this type of content, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. All right, let's get
What's
right
up?
into it. So to start off, what is hyper offense? I'm going to go a quick overview of what it is. Basically, a play style that relies on a lot of very fast, strong Pokemon with a lot of stat boosting moves. Things like Swords Dance, Quiver Dance, Calm Mind, uh, and speed and time is important. HO games never go on for very long. Also, throughout this video, I will be referring to hyper offense as HO. That's what it's commonly known as in the community. Okay, so moving on, there are four main types of HO. You've got standard. This is your sort of typical one suicide lead and five sweepers style. Light screen and reflect or aurora veil teams, sticky web, and terrain. Um, some would consider weather teams or trick room to be HO. I do not. I would say those are more like offense, so I'm going to leave them out of the video. Let's go over what these kind of play styles are like in each individual type of HO. Standard is going to have one or two suicide leads, uh, between 3 to 5 sweepers, and at times anywhere between 0 and 2 offensive support Pokemon that aren't really there to sweep, but just to keep the pressure up and maybe break down the opponent's team to enable some of the other sweepers. Light Screen and Reflect or Aurora Veil typically has bulkier Pokemon than you're used to and sometimes slower. Usually it's used to make Pokemon that are already bulky extremely bulky so they can really set up behind Veil or screens and be very difficult to take down. Although sometimes you can use more frail Pokemon that normally wouldn't have a chance to set up that are given that chance due to Veil. Also, these teams very frequently have hazard removal, often in the form of a Great Tusk or a Mousehold. Cinderace is not really used on these teams since Court Change would reverse your own light screens. And there's often no suicide lead on these teams since they typically prefer to just have another setup sweeper. Sticky Web will almost always have Rabombi. Um, you can use other sticky web users. Vikavolt and Spidops are technically options, but Rabombi is by far the best. All of these teams will have a Goldengo, typically with an air balloon, so they have one guaranteed switch into Great Tusk. With Goldengo, the only real way to remove Sticky Web is going to be Cinderace. Sticky Web will then have some abusers with middling speed, but a lot of other great characteristics. One really popular one is Manaphy, with especially with Tail Glow boosting. That 100 base speed is really its own downfall. It's only bad trait, but Sticky Web really fixes that. And then the rest of the team is based around taking advantage of Cinderace, because that is the main weakness that Sticky Web has to deal with, along with, some might say, Clear Body Dragapult. When I talk about terrain teams, I'm going to focus on grassy terrain because I believe that is the only viable style of terrain, but these teams will have Rillaboom and Sneasler, Unburdened Grassy Seed Sneasler, and often Hatterene and Kingambit as well. These teams can run Aurora Veil, but typically they don't. So on top of these four main styles, there are also two main methods that HO teams use to win. I'm going to call these two different methods Chip Down HO and Diverse HO. Starting with Chip Down HO, this is where the Hyper Offense team will use a lot of Pokemon with similar answers in an attempt to chip down those answers. On the left here, one you could think of is Corviknight. Ogerpon Cornerstone can force Corviknight to take a lot of damage, which is great for Kingambit. It also often forces, on bulkier teams, forces a Terra on Dondozo, since there's very little that can wall Ogerpon Cornerstone, and that Terra forced on Dondozo is really great for Kingambit, since it'll probably be able to fish for flinches with Iron Head, now that Dondozo will not any longer resist that. Another great core here is that Ceruledge can often Destiny Bond forcing a Kingambit attempting to revenge kill it with Sucker Punch to faint, which is really good for Ogre Pawn Cornerstone. The other thing to note is that all of these Pokemon are physical attackers. That's a major characteristic of these chip down HOs, is that they're often really heavy on the physical side or really heavy on the special side. For the most part, these will be physically based though, because a lot of the best priority moves this generation are physical. To the right, we have Diverse HO. This takes a different approach where you instead use a lot of Pokemon with very different counters in the hopes that one of your sweepers will manage to break through and win the game almost outright. One of the advantages to Diverse HO is that you're really free to use whatever are the most threatening HO sweepers in the metagame without really having to worry about their synergy with each other. In this case, you see something like Zamazenta. Zamazenta isn't really always very reliable. If you think about an Iron Defense crunch set, it may or may not win, or it could do nothing. You're okay with that on a team like this, though, because you have a lot of Pokemon that typically either win or do nothing, and for the most part, if you build your team well, one of them will manage to get the win. Now, this is a ranking of what I think the viable styles of HO are. Standard, Grassy Terrain, Sticky Web, and Aurora Veil are very good, all top-level viable styles. Light Screen and Reflect are not so much. They technically are usable, but Aurora Veil is generally a lot better. Alolan Ninetales being able to set up that Aurora Veil on one turn as opposed to two, and having access to Encore is really fantastic. The only real argument for Dragapult that you could give is that it matches up a little bit better against Cinderace, but overall Alolan Ninetales is it's very hard to justify using Dragapult over Alolan Ninetales. In the bad section, we have Electric Terrain and Psychic Terrain. Both of which are really limited by the presence of Ice Spinner and Rillaboom. But I would say Electric Terrain is even worse, what with Iron Moth and Iron Valiant being very common. So your opponent is probably going to be abusing your own Electric Terrain, and Pincurchin is just an absolutely terrible Pokemon to run. So really, really avoid running Electric or Psychic Terrain HO. You could use Dragapult as a screen setter, but you mostly want to stick to the viable side. So that will be the standard HO, Grassy Terrain, Sticky Web, and Aurora Veil. I would stick to using those. Now let's walk through the hyper offense building process, and I'm going to be using an example of a team I built around Double Dance Manaphy. So that's Acid Armor, Take Heart, Scald, and Stored Power. So that was step one, which is choosing an HO viable Pokemon to build around. I actually have a list of my favorite sets for all the new HO viable Pokemon, and that'll be in the description below if you want to check it out. It's not a complete list, but it can give you some ideas to get started. But in this case, I chose Double Dance Manaphy. Step 2 is selecting a style of HO that suits the Pokemon. One thing to note, if you're thinking about whether you want to go for a kind of a chip down style or a diverse style, I would say more reliable Pokemon often appreciate chip down because that's what they need to fully be consistent. And if something is more MU fishy and often kind of can work or can really flop, things like Zamazenta and Iron Moth typically like to be on a diverse HO because they're just not able to make guaranteed progress like most things on a chip down HO should. In this case, I ended up settling on Sticky Web with a kind of a diverse HO style. Aurora Veil was a decent option, but I figured Manaphy was bulky enough that it didn't really need it, and I wanted Sticky Web so that the fast Encore Pokemon that usually really annoy Double Dance Manaphy would be slower and would be attacked before they were able to Encore and lock Manaphy into a setup move. Now we move on to step 3, choosing the best possible support partners. This is the point in the team building process where you have the most freedom, because you don't have very many Pokemon yet. It's not the time to worry about what your team is looking weak to, or if there's anything that really, any particular type you're weak to, it's the time to think on the offensive side. Think, what do I really, really want to support this? In this case, I knew it was a webs team, so I automatically needed Rabombi and Goldengo, which made it an easy choice. But to add something that really helped Manaphy out, I wanted to add a bulk up Great Tusk. This gave me some removal because Manaphy hates coming in on entry hazards, and with its only recovery being the leftovers it holds, it wants all the health it can get. The other thing is, because this was a bulked up Great Tusk, it kind of forced the opponent to show what anti-bulky setup sweeper thing they had. Maybe a tricked choice scarf somewhere that would end up getting attached to the Great Tusks, stuff like that. Random strategies the opponent may have would sort of get revealed on Great Tusk, so I would have Manaphy in the back. So this seemed like four that were really solid and worked well together. Step number 4 is checking what you lose to and kind of patching up the holes in the team. So this is the point where you don't have much freedom in the building process. You don't get to have everything on your wish list. Not the whole rest of the team can't be just sticky web abusers. You have to kind of cover your weaknesses. Earlier I discussed Cinderace being a major weakness, so I had to add a speed boosting Iron Moth, and for clear body Dragapult I needed to add a Kingambit, since otherwise Shadow Ball would completely run through my team. When you're going through this stage, don't think of it like patching up holes on a balance team. You're not trying to defensively wall anything. This is an HO team. What you really want to be aware of are fast, very fast Pokemon and Pokemon with strong priority. So on the fast side, you'll want to look for Dragapult, Zamazenta, Iron Valiant, and Cinderace, making sure your team has ways of handling those. And on the priority side, Rillaboom, Dragonite, and Kingambit are the main ones you've got to watch out for. If you have your team gets completely blasted by something like a Choice Specs Volcanion, that's not really a problem. You may not have a switch in, but you can hit it with whatever's in and revenge kill it with something else. It's only really a problem if you struggle to revenge kill it. And that's the point I'm getting at, is that the Pokemon that are most difficult to revenge kill are going to be those faster Pokemon that you can't immediately outspeed, and those with powerful priority. So as long as you build your hyper offense team to have defensive answers to the fastest things in the tier and the things with priority, you should be set. Number 5, test on ladder and make changes. You're probably not going to get the very, right combination the first time. I certainly didn't. For the sake of this video, I cleaned up the building process a little, but this was my original team that I made. I had this idea that I would use a Swords Dance Cinderace on webs with court change, so if the opponent court changed my webs, I could just send them right back. And I got greedy with hazards even more and thought I could add on Hisuian Samurott, but that turned out to be insufficient to deal with clear body Dragapult, and the Cinderace just turned out to be a really ineffective team member. So testing revealed that my decisions initially were not the best, and I had to change. And that's okay. It usually takes many versions to get a team right, and especially with hyper offense, it can be really difficult to see what's going to work until you see how it does on ladder. All right, well, I hope this was helpful. Um, if you enjoyed, please subscribe and have a great day.